Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Lean Focus webinar series called Best Practices in Implementing an SIOP Process. My name is April Lee, and I'll be your host. And introducing your speaker today is Dave Hinchman. Just a reminder that the information you're going to be seeing today is proprietary information, so it's not meant to be distributed or shared or reproduced in any way. Just some logistics before we get going. You might have realized that you've been put into a listen-only mode, so you will be muted during this session. There are some PDF handouts that are available for download during the webinar, which you can find on the GoToMeeting handouts section where you can download these. For questions and answers, feel free to type in any questions you may have for our panelists today in the chat function, and we'll make sure that as time allows, we'll get to those and answer those in the order that we were received. We will be answering these questions as best we can, and if there are a lot of questions afterwards that we cannot get to, we'll do our best to try to wrap up some answers for y'all. Lastly, a recording of this webinar will be emailed to you one day later. In some cases, it may end up in your spam folder, so just make sure that you just double check to see if that recorded version is in that folder. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn over our introduction to your host, Dave Hinchman. Dave?
Cool, everyone. Good afternoon, evening, or morning, wherever you're at in the world. I'm pleased to be here and spend the next hour or so with you and talking about a subject that you may be near and dear to your heart, and that's best practices in implementing an SIOP process. As you can see by the slide, a little bit of background about myself. I've been involved in this area of focus for many years. Worked with a lot with, actually before Lean Focus, with John Deere. Also involved a lot with Apex, with their board and so forth. And April, could you advance the slide, or there we go. Okay, what we're going to do for the next hour is we'll talk a little bit about Lean Focus in general and where we're at, and then we'll get into the intro and talk about the why, the challenges and benefits, so forth. Make sure we're all on the same page about what SIOP is all about, kind of a process overview. We'll talk about a case study of how SIOP can be implemented and updated, talk about some best practices and resources and so forth, and then allow a little time at the end for some question and answers. So a little bit about Lean Focus. What we are as a company is we build high-performance cultures. There's really three legs to it, as you can see by the emblem. It's all about driven leaders. The people in the team are very experienced in Lean tools and processes, very experienced, have been there, done it type of people. But we are also based on guiding principles and proven systems to make this all happen. As you can see, we've worked with a lot of different industries across pretty much all gambits of the business world. So let's talk about SIOP. When we talk about that, you know, a lot of times people in industry get confused. You hear a lot of times the sales and operation planning. Sometimes it's called sales inventory and operation planning. In my mind, it's all the same thing. When we talk about inventory, you know, it's an idea that makes sure inventory is included in the process. If you look at the Apex definitions, it's included in the process. So for me, it makes no difference what vernacular or what term you use. It's better for whatever works for your company. It's all the same thing. What's key to it, though, it's really trying to find a balance between the demand and the supply side and find that equilibrium. Make sure that you're working to direct the business for competitive advantage. There's key things that are important about it. It's important to have all sales, marketing, finance, and operations involved. And some of the things that are important with the sales and operation planning or SIOP process, it's on a monthly cadence. It brings all functional plans together. And really, it's reconciling the supply and demand and new product plans. So to make sure that you find that sweet spot, as you can see on the graph on the left, what is the best equilibrium to get to the right plan for your business. If you think about it, it's from a simplified standpoint, it's really inputs from a lot of different areas, all parts of the business. You need to have sales and marketing group really in talking about it in units and dollars based. both important. Many times people in marketing sales only work about dollars and they forget about the units. People in operations need to figure out how many units they build. So you need to make sure that they're on the same page. Finance is an integral part of that process, and also new product development plans, especially when you have very active new product plans and where things are going. And the key is to put this all into an executive SIOP process where you can agree upon and communicate a game plan on how you're running your business. If you look at this slide here, in the planning process, SIOP is a really key part of the planning process. It's not the only part, and so many times people think that, hey, if I get a robust SIOP process, I'm going to win. Everything's going to be great. Well, unless you have an appropriate business plan, and the SIOP process creates a production plan that gets into the master scheduling and then down MRP and actually execution. It all needs to be connected together. What's important, and if you think about this from a standpoint, it needs to be kind of a calming effect, so that you first develop a business plan and get a good plan. Do that on an annual basis. You're focused like on revenue, profit, and ROI. Brings it down to the SIOP process, which is monthly cadence, and talking about product families, product groups. We break that down into weekly, which gets into more of the mix type of conversation, and then down to the actual part planning, down into the daily MRP and so forth. And then it gets out into execution. So it's important to be effective in all parts of this. But if you think about it, the SIOP process is important. And if you can do this correctly, life can be a lot easier later on. This is not, again, a standalone process. If you look at our business system, our lean focused business system, you can see some of the areas highlighted that all these things come into place that need to be connected to it. With any process, standard work, leader standard work, daily management, problem solving, all these kind of things are very integral to a successful SIOP process. So why do people care about SIOP? And here's an example of some of the things that come about and kind of the symptoms. And SIOP, if an effective SIOP process can actually help you in a lot of these things. Right now, inventory stockouts are extremely important. Back orders, a lot of companies are really struggling with that right now. Sometimes they have too much inventory. They still have stockouts, but still too much inventory. They're doing blowout sales to reduce current inventory. And a lot of blaming takes place about who's doing what's causing on-time delivery, what's missing revenue, so forth. So these are kind of common challenges you can face, and a SIOP process can go a long ways into helping you become effective and executing well. Next slide. So why is it important to our business? It helps support demand, customer demand. It helps support the overall business plan. You saw that in how the hierarchical structure works. It's aligned our vision against reality. You know, it's great to have a plan, but you actually got to make it work. It's kind of where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. You need to measure performance, control costs. You're looking at inventories, make sure your inventories are planned right. You know, this whole teamwork, it makes a big difference having the management group as an effective team to all work together as a plan. It makes a huge difference. And then also, when you do have change, what do you do for implementing the countermeasures so that you can be effective and have a plan ahead of time? Any process like this, a SIOP process, it's like the bottom line shows, it's critical. It depends on your team's ability to coordinate effectively and work together. So why do people fail? As you go through, and I kind of give you a background, my first experience with the SIOP process was over 30 years ago. I went to an executive education class at Crandard School of Management at Purdue University, where it's kind of a new process. And you know, you think about that, it's a long time ago. Why isn't this all working well? Why isn't the process, you know, being effective as what it could be? And I'll tell you, over the years, I've kind of like quoting the movie title, "The Good, Bad, and the Ugly." I've seen the good, I've seen the bad, and I've seen some ugly. And a lot of people start and they miss. They started the process many times, and many times they're not effective. And you think about what the root causes are, and if you kind of do a Six Sigma approach and look for the X's that cause the root cause, you'll find, sometimes there's competing agendas and projects. The data is mismanaged. There's a lot of data out there, but it's not usable data. It's not in a format that you can use to make meaningful decisions. Organizational commitment throughout the organization may not be committed. Top management support is critical. Basically, these meetings are the leadership's meetings, and so if they're going to be successful, then everybody needs to be part of it. Integrated tools and systems. If you don't have everybody talking on the same page, you're not going to get the right answers. So you need to make sure that it's aligned, it's organized, and everybody's on the same page to make it work. The idea is that it shouldn't be this period end chaos, end of the month, end of the quarter. We're not making goals. What are we doing? These things should be planned ahead of time. I use that word calming effect again, that if you do it right, you have a business plan that helps calm it. You do SIOP, it helps calm it down to monthly cadence, then into master schedule, and then to MRP, and then into execution. Each of these points can be very useful to helping you get where you need to get to. So you think about it, what would you rather be? Oops, too many. Okay, so benefits. There's a lot of benefits in an effective SIOP process. Number one, aligning production, financial, and sales plans are critical. It's very important. If you have each of these functions doing their own thing, it's not going to work. Number two, operational plans with the overall business plans. It makes sure that everybody has a business plan, what they're going to do. You need to make sure that you can get to that the operations actually can deliver what you plan on doing. If it's done right, having everybody in the room talking the same language, trying to solve the problem, can go a long ways for increased accuracy. That cross-functional planning is great. One of the things we talk about standard work and the lean process, and this whole clear leadership meeting cadence and proactive problem solving for demand and supply is critical to making sure that we're effective in making it work. And then also planning the resource allocation discussion to regulate and meet a production plan. I go back in some time, and I remember a SIOP meeting I was in where the people in marketing were putting out a sales production out 3 months out, sales promotion. At the same time, the HR group was downsizing second shift to one shift, and operational people were ready for that part. And if this would have gone through, they'd have been in trouble. By talking ahead of time, they were able to able to align their plans and get this organized so that it became a non-issue 3 months out. And that's kind of when you want to get when you make these kind of things happen. So really, it's like about everybody on the same team, and they collaborate together to make it happen. An integral part of this whole process is sales is forecasting and forecast accuracy. If you do it right, it can really help your bottom line. There's a lot of numbers here and things, but I think what's critical is it's measuring forecasts that's actionable. Many people, most companies measure forecast accuracy, but they measure the wrong things, and they don't measure something that you can take and actually do something with it. So a lot of time is spent going through to figure out what accuracy you're trying to measure. Is it based on MAPE and bias? And how do you use that to your advantage so you can make meaningful decisions? At what point you need to order additional parts and so forth in your supply chain based on when the sales are, how accurate that information is. So a lot of time needs to be spent in this area to really focus on what's important to you to make it work. So with that, let's kind of talk about the process and how it all goes together. When we think about an implementation roadmap, you got to start somewhere. And this is very similar to any lean approach that we use is, you kick off, we do some invitations and initiation and high-level planning. As part of that is kind of that process, you're trying to figure out where you're at today, where you want to be in the future, and what do you got to do to get there. So sometimes you got to develop some process and tools. Sometimes you have to develop the skill sets of the people. And then basically you start somewhere with a product line and go. There's lots of different approaches to take depending on the complexity of your company, complexity of your product lines, your supply chain, your sales force. There's lots of different ways of attacking this to kind of go after it. But the idea is you got to start somewhere. You need to map it out to figure out what is best for you. The one thing I would mention is this is not a one size fits all. You go through and you can pull up any textbook and you'll see a slide that looks like this. It shows a 5-step process, a very basic integral part of the SIOP process. You talk about you need to collect data and data that's meaningful. We talk about forecasts and actuals and so forth and what's coming up the future, the FE business and so forth. And then we look at how we put that together and put together a demand plan that's pretty accurate, what we're doing, an unconstrained demand plan what we're trying to get to. And then we take that to the supply side and see how we can actually make that work. We do a reconciliation with the pre-SIOP process and then have an executive meeting where we go through and make recommendations to management to go through and do it. And then it's a cycle and it repeats itself. But anybody can see this diagram. Everybody can put the process in place, but there's many things and many pitfalls that can happen that prevent you from being effective and where you want to go. And I'll tell you that it's not a common process, but it needs to be configured and customized for your particular situation and to be effective. Everybody's got a different sales organization, the way it's organized, different parts of the world and so forth. You've got different product families, things you're trying to sell, how it all goes together. You have a lot of different, the supply side can be one plant, many plants, shared plants. There's lots of different things that get involved and it really needs to be customized to be effective for what makes sense for your business. So who's involved? As we talked about, we've got the supply side of things for the resource planning, and then we've got the demand side. And it's all connected with the operational plan, the sales and marketing plan, the business plan. And I think it's important in this slide to really think about it. The SIOP process is really focused on volume decisions at a monthly basis in units. From there, we break it down into the product mix and then down into the part level planning to make it work. And it's important that the conversations take place in those levels at the right time and not mixed up. So when you think about this, it's like standard work, daily management on a monthly basis. So you're doing all these kind of things happening, and then every month, you're repeating it. And it goes back to the feedback loop again. You start the process again. So you've gone through, you've got the demand forecast, you've gone through, you do the demand planning, supply planning meetings, the reviews and so forth, look at the results and start over again and get better. And continually keep that going over the next 12 to 18 months. In order to become effective in these processes, it requires a lot of inputs and valuable inputs and inputs that are meaningful that can be used. So you think about sales. It's not about what they're going to sell, but it's the unconstrained forecast based on what is possible. How do we execute the plan? The business unit's looking at market expectations, the customer expectations. What is the demand lead times for your customers? What do you need to provide? What's the unconstrained forecast so that you can make sure that you can actually build or sell what the customer wants? And then do you have the capacity in manufacturing and engineering to produce that? And then it's also important to then reconcile this with the financial plan so that that it all matches up. You got to be a viable business while you're doing all this thing. Finance shouldn't be driving what your numbers are, but you should make sure they're reconciled to make sure that they work together. One of the key parts of having a SIOP process is very much a very standard work meeting agenda that's very crisp. You've got to identify what topics you're going to talk about, what you're going to review in the topics. Everybody needs to bring to the table what they're going to talk about. And then, as you can see, some key questions on the side of what needs to be addressed during these meetings. These shouldn't be very long meetings, and it's not an information gathering meetings or information, they're action meetings, so that you actually decide what you're going to do based on that. Everybody needs to come prepared. So let me talk about a client case study and how this goes. So this particular company was a little over $1 billion company, but they wanted to establish a framework. They had something before, but it wasn't driving to where they need to get to. They need to look for long-term and short-term, and they need to do something in terms of the supply chain operations distribution can handle by maximizing the business. So what we did in this approach is we went through and first off establish the right team, right? Get the right executive support participation. We went through and developed the process during the Kaizen week workshop, where we spent a couple of days of really working on the theory, and then applying the theory to actually come up with a process that's going to work. Part of that is you map out the current value chain. You go through and map out the current processes you have. You look at what it's going to take to make it work. You go through and start seeing what information you have in the demand, what information you have for supply capabilities. You put together what the agendas are, who the people are, making sure they're having information that's going to help each other come with the right answers. So establishing metrics. A lot of times the metrics aren't the right metrics that need to be addressed. So we need to go through and make those happen. And then the idea is, also figure out what the results are, and also make sure you have a sustainability process that it will stay effective and will keep moving on. So you're continuously reviewing the plan and the process to make it all work. So what we did, this was a week-long endeavor. We delivered basically the standard work playbook, the metrics dashboard, the process calendars by phases, analysis tools, analytic tools, the meeting agendas, everything that was required to make it happen. And basically they launched it the following month. This is a monthly cadence, so it's important to put everything you need to do to make it work together during the workshop, and then you start going. Now the first month was a little rough. Didn't necessarily have everything in place, but they had a lot of things done. And then the next month was better. The following month was better. And by month 3, they were really cranking along. Now, in a case like this, there was multiple plants involved, multiple product lines. And so they took on one product line, one plant to start with, and then they were going to extend it to the other ones to make it work. As you can see on the right, there's an example of some standard work, some playbooks, some sustainment trackers, all the things required to make sure that it goes as planned. But it became a very successful process after it launched. So kind of next steps and best practices, resources. So if you go through this process, you got to look at where you're at, and every business, every company is in a little slightly different place. You need to ask yourself certain questions. Do you have a cross-functional team by the design, and includes all the players that need to be there? Now, every organization is slightly organized differently. Sometimes sales and marketing are the same people. Sometimes they're separate. Sometimes manufacturing. Sometimes you don't have any manufacturing. It's all purchase parts, and purchasing has to be integral part of this whole thing, along with HR and logistics. And the next question is a balance between supply and demand with the overall strategy. So you're trying to make sure that you can provide what you're going to provide, what your customer needs, and everybody agrees to it, so that you have a strategy and a plan to deliver on time. Another question comes up: is it forward-looking? And you're looking at the customer trends, the market, competitors. A lot of the data analysis and forecasts, you want a statistical fine, but you also need to know what the trends are and what the customer things are, information coming out that people in sales and marketing are probably more aware of, to make sure that's all balanced into it and creating a good demand plan. So a couple key things: is it conducted at a product family level? Product families is a whole discussion itself. what I found is that many times what people in the marketing side, sales marketing side, think of product families are totally different than what the people in operations and purchasing and so forth think of when they buy parts. And it takes a while to kind of come with a plan that you can determine what is the right product family. And you want to separate that discussion between the volume and mix. It's not a simple discussion, but it's one that needs to take place. And once you come up with an agreement, it can go a long ways in becoming very actionable to make it work. Again, this is not a standalone process. It needs to be totally integrated with business planning and down to the tactical planning and execution, so that it's all integrated into a cohesive plan. And it also aligns the market opportunities against company capabilities, so that you have a plan that will work. Now, getting started, if depending where you're at in the process, many times we'll do like a self-assessment, assessment of the process and see where you're at. And these are some of the questions that you start thinking about what are important. Like, is the data up to date, accurate, timely? Actually, another thing is it even usable? There's a lot of data information out there, but is it something you can actually use? Are the owners clearly identified and held accountable? Both those terms are important. Having somebody identified is great, but are they held accountable, or they don't show up to meetings, or don't have information in a timely manner? Are you addressing the right time horizon? Typically, a SIOP process works with like a rolling 12 to 18 months. You've got 24 months max probably. But the idea is you want to make sure that you have good information out there so you can kind of see what's happening in the future. The focus of the meetings is not this month. It's looking at months 2 through 6, with keeping an eye on 6 through 12 and up to 18. So you kind of know what's happening so that you can make the right decisions as you go along. Now, I realize that the further out you go, the less accurate the information is, but at least you have it directionally, you have an idea where you're going. That's what the key is. Another thing that's missing in many companies is when you talk about planning, you need to think about dollars and revenue. You also need to think about it in terms of units. And so you understand how many units you're going to ship, how many you're going to build, so forth, as opposed to how many dollars you're going to build. Does the SIOP process involve cross-functional senior leaders? Again, having the right people with the right responsibilities and being accountable is extremely important. You need to spend quite a bit of time really thinking about who those people are. And we spend, during the workshop, we spend quite a bit of time actually determining who those type of people are, who the right people are, and are they capable to do the job that needs to be done. Capacity reviews are critical. Do you compare actual forecasted? Measure the forecast accuracy. You may want to look at it in terms of May bias. You may want to think about production forecast accuracy versus sales accuracy. At what time frame? There's a whole lot of things that can be looked at to make sure that you're getting the right information that's usable for what you want to do. To review it, is a monthly cadence for the SIOP process, and is a financial plan and the SIOP plan compared and aligned, and make sure that it's connected together. That's critical to make that work. As you can see, there's a number of questions that we go through, 77 points. And the idea is not to get perfect on it, but the idea is to see where you're at, and then to see where you can improve to get better. That you need to ask yourself, do I have a process? When we talk to different companies, it seems like the questions come up are, number one, we don't have a process, or we have a process, but it's not working, or we have a great process, but it needs to be tweaked a little. And so as you get into it, you're looking for where the opportunities are, and and want to build upon what you have. You don't want to necessarily throw out what you have, but how can you build upon it to improve it to the point where it's effective to where it needs to get to? And it could be caused by lots of different issues to be effective. So typically what we've done in the past is you could schedule a SIOP Kaizen workshop, typically a week long. depending on the size of the operation. And it gets into, as you can see on this one pager, that you've got, you're trying to look what you're trying to accomplish, maximizing revenue and profit, optimizing inventory, lower operational costs, and achieve best-in-class delivery. And you're looking at all the different facets of it. It's kind of a closed loop operation. And then on the right side, you can kind of see some of the things we come up with. And if you look at the deliverables, I think there's this next slide will show that in more detail. But there's some ways to get started, and you can look at this later on your own if you'd like. What we try to come to at the end of the workshop, and you could do this on your own or with our help. But the idea is there's different aspects of it to have the work ready to go to make it work. You need to know, like step one is to understand where you're at today, and maybe you don't have anything. Well, that's great. You can hold that for later and do a sustainability audit afterwards later sometime, but understand the current state of where you're at. Understand what data you have available so you can start building upon that. You need to spend a lot of time on the team structure, who's doing what, who's bringing what to the table, with a RACI document and matrix, understand who's responsible for each of the parts of the business and who are the right people. I've been to some SIOP meetings where there's dozens and dozens of people sitting in a meeting, and most of them are just sitting there. It really, you need to get the critical few, the critical people that are accountable in the meeting, and many times these are less than 10 in a meeting. But to get the right people and make sure that everybody that comes to the meeting has something to say and is bringing something to the table. The rest of the people can be informed later. Let them, they're too busy. But I've seen some companies where they've got the entire workforce involved in this, and that's not the key. They need to be involved, but later on, and we, think about the responsible, accountable, communicate, informed, RACI type of mentality of where you're at. That can help you really figure out who the right people are. Number 5 is the standard calendars and agendas. Part of it is just getting that down, that it's, and again, that there's no one size fits all. A lot of times it's based on when the leadership meetings they're held, and sometimes you got to do some backwards scheduling to figure out when that could be. It's kind of a backwards forward scheduling discussion where when's the data available and when do I need it by and how do I get that set up. But it's got to be a very rigid monthly cadence so that everybody knows what they have to do when they need to do it. And of course, everything, there's always going to be action, countermeasures, and so forth, and to keep track of that and make sure you have follow-up with it is important. Sustainability is critical for this process, and having an attendance tracker and making sure people are prepared for the meetings are critical to look and see that over the next few months, or is everybody doing what they need to be doing to make it work? The workbook. This is kind of, you can do a lot of things. You'll see a lot of people that will offer software packages that do some really beautiful workbooks to get the information. Perfectly candid from my experience. Typically, the operations people work in an ERP system like SAP, Oracle, or others. The sales group works in things like Salesforce or other. And the idea is you got to get that information merged together. What I find 9 times out of 10, Excel is probably the best workbook to work with because people know how to use it. And if you can merge and have lookup tables to get all the data in one book, can be extremely useful. And this is something that you would need to develop to make sure that it's workable, meaningful, and drives the behavior you want. Number 9 talks about standard work, the documents, the process. There's lots of different methods and methodology people use. It all depends on what your company does for documenting processes. Some like to use flow charts, swim lane charts. Some like to use documents like you see here, Word documents. It doesn't make any difference what you use. The key is something that you will use, and that's part of your culture, your company. So any of these things like that can be helpful to put that together. But it does need to have clear responsibility and who's doing what in the process somewhere. And of course, a dashboard and understand metrics to understand, are you driving the behavior, are you getting where you need to get to, and what are you going to track to make it work? So these are kind of 10 critical components of the process itself, of the SIOP process. Each one needs to be done, each one needs to be done well. Can help you get to getting a robust process. So with that, hopefully this has been somewhat useful for you to kind of give an idea of where you're at in your process. I think you need to decide, number one, do I have a SIOP process? If not, think about what you'd like to do to put one together. If you do have one, it's not driving the right behavior, start breaking it down and to find out what's working, what's not working, and fix those things. Or either sometimes you need to start over and just kind of do a refresh, restart to get where you need to get to. Hopefully this conversation has been useful. You've got a couple of nuggets that might be useful that you can apply and use for yourself, and kind of go from there. The last thing I'd mention is we try to do this on a monthly cadence ourselves, the webinars. And as you see, the next one will be actually coming up sooner than a month. It would be called Developing Great Problem Solvers with 10 Simple Questions. It'll be on the Tuesday, August 30th. And so you can click on the link there and sign up for other ones. And hopefully this has been something to help trigger something to get you going. I believe April has provided some handouts. You'll have access to the WebEx recording, or this webinar recording, and there's also the one pager for the SIOP process to help you understand what that's all about.
Thank you so much.
April?
Yeah, perfect. Well, that was really helpful and informative, and I really appreciate all the insights that you shared. And I could really see that if a business wanted to kind of jumpstart this process, it would be really useful to have somebody like you kind of help kick that off. It seems like you've seen a lot of pitfalls, but also a lot of best practices to help a team just get up and running. So with that, we'll turn this to the audience to ask some questions. And so on your dashboard, you've got the ability to submit your questions in the chat. And we'll go ahead and just have Dave answer some of the questions coming in here. So we will be sharing that. So Dave, what I'll do is I'll go ahead and kick off the first question for you. The question is, what are the typical pitfalls that organizations run into when trying to implement SIOP for the first time?
Actually, if you could go to slide 16, is that possible?
Yep.
These are the pitfalls. I mean, these are things that are that happen all the time. You get into it and you start looking at things, you'll see that so-and-so never comes to a meeting, or they're not prepared. There's a lack of organizational commitment. For these to be an effective SIOP process, usually the president of the division or the president of that product line is the one that's the top management person in the organization. It's basically their meeting. And if they're not engaged or committed to it, the rest of it can drop off. You can have, if you don't have a solid SIOP leader that doesn't know how to manipulate data and get it in useful terms, it can go astray also. So there's things like the integrated tools, and other things you see is that many times you've got to understand what the purpose of the meeting is, and then you need to go through and make sure that it stays at that level. It's the volume level, monthly cadence. You're not talking about the current month. You've got to, those issues still need to be talked about, but not at this meetings, not during this time. You're trying to focus on taking care of issues month 2 to month 6, out to month 12, so that these don't become issues in the current scheme. It's very difficult to do sometimes, but you've got to make sure you provide the discipline to be and stick to that standard work to where you want to go.
Great. Next question is coming in. How do you recommend a company to start? Should you start with a product family, a plant, a product part number, or some other way?
Yeah, that's a great question, April, and there's really no right or wrong answer with that discussion. It all kind of depends on where you're at, how complicated your process is. You know, I've worked with some companies that they start with the easiest product line because if they figure they can get that done, they want to save the more complicated one for later, so that all the idiosyncrasies can be addressed later. Some like to start with the most complicated one. Sometimes it depends on what the expertise and bench strength you have with the different product lines. Is where you want to start, but a lot of times you don't necessarily want to start with the entire company at one time. You want to get success, get that going, and then work with, you know, get the one product line or product lines going, and then work with the next one to get that and learn from it and get better. And it gets easier each time you do that. So that the idea is that the entire process may not be exactly the same, but the overall process is the same, but the mechanics may be different. And how you look at different product lines, and because of the different demand streams and organizations and so forth.
And Dave, usually if you were working with a client on kickstarting this, would you be talking about this in the pre-consult? You know, is that when you're kind of identifying how to get going?
Sure, that's exactly right. Is first, you know, you try to understand what's working, what's not, what problem are you trying to solve, what's your business look like, and then from there, kind of jointly decide what the best approach is to be effective. And with any of these kind of workshops, and whether you do it yourself or with our help, there's a lot of data to be prepared, a lot of information put together to make sure that you have meaningful information. The idea is with the SIOP process is take away the emotion and use data to help decide what the right answers are.
That's great. This question comes in from Ryan C. He says, this is new to me. I plan for production level orders or work orders. How do you learn about forecasts when your customers don't provide forecasts? Most of their customers do not.
Right, so you've got to decide, you use the best information you can get, right? So your sales and marketing group are getting information from their customers, right? They're taking orders. A lot of times you kind of look at historical information, you've got that. Sometimes it's as simple as, you know, you look at the last few years, you're looking for seasonality trends, you're looking for any kind of information to help understand what next year's going to look like. A lot of times a forecast, no forecast, any forecast is better than no forecast. So the idea is what can you get and what can be the best you can. I've been with some companies where you're in the same situation you're in. So what they've done is look at history. They looking for seasonality or trends within the history, and then they're kind of looking at what the sales marketing people feel is it going to be a 5% uptrend or 5% down, or is it a major thing coming in? Do we have new products coming on? And come up with the best guess demand plan you can come up with. And that's going to be better than having no forecast. At least you have a plan to go after and decide, okay, based on that, what's my workforce need to be? What do I need to buy from a purchasing supply chain standpoint? Do I have everything in place so that I can be effective with the long lead times that you have in a lot of those cases?
Great. This question comes in from Joe E. He says, what is the top 1 to 2 KPIs that are most impactful to monitor the health of an SIOP process?
Good question. So typically, companies think about what's important to their business, and some type of operational execution, on-time delivery are usually is right up there. Of course, you think about SIOP, you're talking about sales, when it has some kind of sales forecast, and also actual sales. You want to look at inventory levels to know where are you going up or down on those kind of things. So really, you think about are you executing on time the way you're supposed to execute, inventory, sales revenue, and of course, monitoring things like forecast accuracy are some of the other ones that come up with it. But one of the things I think that you need to decide is what are you trying to drive as a company, and then how does the SIOP process help you get there, and from there determine what those metrics are. to be effective.
That's great. The next question comes in from Armin B. Asks what to do if we have the right process installed, but the people don't follow it.
Like any process, I reminds me back of my earlier days when I had a person I was working with that was always looking for that silver bullet. And, it's like, think about material replenishment. I tried MRP, it didn't work. Why didn't it work? Well, people didn't keep the parms updated. Okay, I'm gonna use Kanban. Kanban didn't work. Why didn't Kanban work? Because people were losing the cards. So they didn't turn the cards in. Okay, so the idea is that a process only works if the people using the process follow the process. So if you don't have people following the process, you're wasting your time. So you've got to have whatever process you pick, and however you do it. If people follow it, you're gonna have a chance for success. If they don't follow it, it's not going to work. So with the SIOP process, it's number one, you need to get a good process established. You need to have clear accountability, responsibility, but then people have to deliver. If they don't, you're just having meetings and you're not getting results. So it has to be an integral, get that good process, good people, and good data. And if you can get all three of those together working, then you're going to be effective. If you don't, you have good people, good process, but the data is terrible, it's not going to work. You get wrong answers. So you need all three to make it work, to be effective. And if you're not getting it, then you need to get the top management commitment to start it and make it their meeting. It makes a whole lot of difference if the head person is deciding this is how we're going to do it and expects it.
Absolutely. And earlier in the webinar, you discussed that the SIOP process is as a result of the overall company's business plan. And so if the leadership's signed off on that business plan, the SIOP part is a part of that execution. And so, really the leadership needs to be behind all the activities of what this means. So I think that's a great point, Dave.
It's
Brad?
it should be a pretty easy sell, because you think about it, it's the one chance where you've got, if you're the leader, the top management, head dog there, top dog, you've got all your people in one place, and you're all getting a game plan that's going to work, and you're all coordinated together. You think about any sports team, and football season's coming up pretty soon, and people are talking about preseason, at least in the U.S. here, and you think about it, if the head coach has a game plan and each player decides to go off and do their own thing, the quarterback's getting ready to throw the pass and the wide receiver is not anywhere near where he's supposed to be, it's going to fail. So you've got to work together as a team, but it's a time when you can get everybody together in a huddle and say, here's how we're going to do it. Ready? Here's our plan. Break. Let's go. And you do this once a month, so it's not a lot of commitment or time. But if you do it right, you can have everybody coordinated together.
That's great. So Brad B asks, he says, thanks for the great overview. My question is, when the majority of the business offerings are new products, let's say about 90% plus, some in final design stages, how would SIOP accommodate that model? Or when should SIOP be leveraged?
Yeah. So when you think about the SIOP process, if you're building the same products every day and no changes at all, the amount of new product introduction is minimal, and the amount of time they spend in it, a lot of times they just are there for informational and only. So like when you do the RACI documents and figure out who's attending what event, a lot of times it's very much informational. But as you get new products and new things all the time, that's a very much an integral part, and they've got to have a seat at the table. And if you're put your new product hat on, you want to know when you can get things released and when you can be effective in making it happen. To me, it's a great avenue or venue for the new product person to get their wishes in there, so they know when they can get the products built, when they can get it sold and out to the customers. So they've got to have a very much an integral part of how they're going to do that. And one of the things that's important in the process for new product is to provide a type of communication tool that you're going to use in the information. Sometimes what I've seen work really well is new products, a document, it might be in the Excel, that shows every new product program, what the new products are, what product families they affect, how much it affects. Is it cannibalizing old products? Is it new? Where's it at? What's the time schedule? So that your demand curves, your demand graphs, and your supply graphs have new products and built into it, so they know what the impact of the business is. So it can be very useful when you have a situation like you're talking about. It's almost critical to have something like that to make it work.
That's great. Thank you. Now, this question comes from Megan L, and it's very helpful for, advice with smaller manufacturing companies who, the people wear a lot of different hats, right? So the question is, it may be hard to convince leadership of the need for this process because it may require another manager to lead the process. Have you worked with smaller organizations to get this process implemented?
Sure, it's very leverageable. That's why it's not one size fits all. So as you go through and determine who's attending what meeting, it all depends. It could be, in some companies you require a lot of people because there's all these different demand streams and all these different people involved, and you want to make sure that all the players that know something, can bring something to the table, are included. In other companies, one person can take care of the equivalent of 3 or 4 other people. So that's all you need. And the idea is to identify what you're actually trying to accomplish with these things, so that they aren't additional meetings, and a lot of times take the place of other things. So that a lot of the times the conversation, these workshops that go on is okay, we need to get this group of people together. These are the 4 or 5 people that need to be in this meeting to come up with the right answer to create the demand plan. Well, they already meet on the second Thursday about something else. Okay, well, let's carve out some time with that group to do that at the same time, or whatever. So you can customize this a lot of different ways, but the idea is that by the end of the month, you have a plan of what you're going to build for the next rolling 12 to 18 months. And by product family, do you have the right people? Do you have the right parts? Do you have the right sales, so that you have everything will come together and everybody's on the same plan of where they want to go. So it can be as simple or as complex as you want it to be. So yeah, starting somewhere is important. That whole planning hierarchy is important. From a business plan, I don't care what kind of company you have, you need to have a business plan. And then you have to figure out how you're going to operate on a monthly cadence, down to weekly, down to the daily, and executing. So everybody has that. Now, how do you make that work for you? So it doesn't have to be as sophisticated as a multi-billion-dollar company, but it can be. But you can organize it in such a way that it's going to make a difference for you.
And really, at the end of the day, when we think about a business, a lot of these areas or departments work as silos. And really, the core idea of SIOP is just to have a cross-functional team planning together. We're kind of moving the organization in the same direction versus siloed departments, right? So small business, large business, it's kind of the same idea. Just really bring a cross-functional team together to plan it out.
And piling on to that, April, is like this slide looking at the lack of integrated tools. When everybody works in silos, they don't communicate well. And the idea is that if you can talk in the same terms, part of when you do these workshops, part of it is getting people to talk the same language, let alone the tools, and to get them thinking along the same lines and find out what information they can provide to help the other group do what they need to do. And a lot of times it's just a minor of changing a few things or filtering it differently or consolidate it differently, and to be able to get answers, they can actually make them actionable. So that's what the key of getting this working together as a team can be.
Perfect. For the next question, Faisal Z asks, who is the owner of SIOP process per se? How can an organization move from a monthly plan bucket to a weekly bucket with the help of SIOP? Thanks.
Okay, so who owns it? Typically, the top management person owns it. It's their process. Now, who manages it? There's typically a SIOP manager that maybe do that plus some other things. Might be the head of production planning, might be head of supply chain, might be head of something different, depending on the size of the organization. A big organization probably has one person that's focused on that kind of thing. So that's who owns the process. So now, if you think about if you can go to slide 12. So when we think about where it fits in the overall process, again, it's important to think about a slide like this. Apex has a lot of them too, but you want to think about what question you're trying to answer and what are you trying to accomplish. So when you think about business plan, everything you talk about in business plan should be talking about it on an annual basis. I'm going to do that next year, the year after, the next 3-4 years. This is my plan. I need these number of machines. I need this much profit. I need this much revenue. I've got all the plans in place to make that happen. Now we actually get an execution. The SIOP process is talking about volume level discussions, units, monthly cadence for the next rolling 12 to 18 months. Now, once you agree to that, then you break that down and you load the production plan into master schedule, which runs MRP. So that brings you down into the weekly planning. And then a lot of times, many companies have a daily execution system they take up from the ERP system to get it down into the daily cadence to making sure that they get what they need to do. So you can't stop at just SIOP. You can't stop at business plan. You can't just do, I mean, a lot of people just do a master schedule MRP and execution. If you don't do these things up front, you're not going to be effective. You need to get a plan of what you're trying to accomplish and make sure that you have the right people. But the question is, what questions are you answering at each of these steps? And that's where you got to make sure that the meetings are set up so that they are effective to deliver the results you want.
That's great, great. Dave, thank you so much. And we have time for one last question before we end. The question is, what is some advice you can give to keep the process alive and continuously improving?
So this kind of is a question you think about every process you have in your organization. You need some kind of sustainment process to make it effective. In the case of SIOP, one of the things that you think about, what's critical for the SIOP process to be effective? A lot of times it's people. Once you have a process set up, that's in pretty good shape. You want on a yearly basis, you want to go through and modify it, saying this is working, this is not, the agenda needs to be shifted, the people need to change a little bit. You can do that you should do that on a regular basis. From a data standpoint, you're looking for the action plans and making sure that you've got the data in place and updated, and might have some. You start with something, you might find ways to improve upon it, to continue to improve upon to get better answers. So you're always updating the data and what you're looking at that to see if it's effective. From a monthly cadence, you want to look at basically the attendance tracker is a way to look for sustainment. If these are the people that need to be there to make the right decisions, are they there? Are they prepared? You know, and validating that that's working well can go a long ways to making sure it's working. But you know, with any process, you need to kind of revisit it every year. Like you saw that on slide. What slide was that? The self-assessment on slide 31. Going through and evaluating the process. You know, at least on a you know, maybe you do it on a semi-annual basis to start with, but at least on an annual basis, kind of go through and see if you're still targeted the way you need to be, or something missing. Those are kind of things for sustainment that goes a long ways to being effective.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, David. This was really informative, and we want to thank the audience for joining us today at this webinar. Again, you know, at the completion of this webinar, a recorded version will be sent to your email, so just make sure it didn't end up in your spam tomorrow. And otherwise, you know, if you have any questions about SIOP, or you want to get started, or you want to see if this is the right process for you, you can reach out to us at Lean Focus and we can help you. We're happy to do a pre-consult and understand your situation a little bit better and see if there's a good chance for us to support you. So with that, I want to just thank everyone again. Thank you, Dave. Great presentation, and we hope to hear from you soon. Thanks.
Thank you.